So, regarding the story of Kain, we talk in Hashem about the korban we brought, and we're going to talk from the Das Kain, Pirish Rosh. He is brought with the Das Kainim brings that Kain brought a sacrifice, Miprihu Adom, from the fruits of their ground, and the Rosh brings Mimoiser Ma'acholi, from the remnants of his food, what was left over after he had eaten whatever he wanted. And that was why Hashem was upset with him. Hashem said, Vayimi Kates Yomim, Vayovi Kain. The end of the days he brought. Perhaps he should have brought earlier. But Hevel, Hevel did not want to bring a korban at all, did not want to derive any benefit from his own possessions, which was the livestock, until such time as he had brought a sacrifice therefrom. It says, he brought a sacrifice from the firstborn of his sheep, of his flock, implying that he did not himself dare to take any benefit until he brought the sacrifice. And commenting on this, Chazal tell us that the comment, Chazal brought Pishton, he brought flax, and Hevel brought from the firstborns of his sheep, and therefore the Torah said, okay, from now on you're not allowed to wear Shaatnez, you're not allowed to wear any clothing that combines these two elements, wool and flax, because one, flax comes from the improper sacrifice brought by Kain, and wool relates to the proper sacrifice brought by Hevel, because Hevel brought from sheep, and wool comes from sheep, and therefore, says the Torah, it's inappropriate for a person to combine the sacrifice of the sinner with the sacrifice of the righteous one. Therefore, you shouldn't wear clothes that combine these two elements. So one has to understand, first of all, the sacrifice of Hevel was not of wool. He sacrificed the sheep, not the wool. So we can understand this. Perhaps we'll bring in at this point already the Das Kain himself, the Baalei Tosis, which we mentioned. It's maybe a good idea to look it up. On the Shemona Esrei, we talked about Togi Vor Elom Hashem Chayim Meisim HaTorah Lo Yishia. It's going to be relevant here. We're not going to discuss that here, but it's very relevant. The Das Kain brings Vayisha Hashem El Hevel El Minchosei. After Hevel brought his sacrifice, Hashem turned or favored, saved Hevel and his offering. And the Das Kain asks, essentially, it's implied he's asking a question, that if Hashem favored him, how come Hashem favored Hevel himself and his sacrifice? That's the terminology that's used. Hashem favored or saved, granted salvation to Hevel and to his sacrifice. If Hevel 2 minutes later ends up a murdered victim of Kain, what is the value in Hashem's favor and grace and salvation if it doesn't in any way save him? So the Das Kain answers, it must be that Hashem actually saved him in the world to come. Hashem offered him, gave him, guaranteed him, it seems, a place in the world to come. That's Vayisha. That's a salvation that Hashem offered him here. And says the Das Kain, from here you see that it's almost implicit and clearly said in the Torah, an allusion, not more than an allusion, it's an explicit reference to and the world to come. Otherwise, there's no rational way of understanding these verses. That Hashem gave him salvation, unless you say it refers to the world to come. So therefore, here we have a very good reference to those who seek to perhaps say that there's no such thing as the world to come in the written Torah. It says the Das Kain, it says it's very clearly written here. I might ask, why is the Talmud not mention this as one of the proofs? Whatever, this is what the Das Kain says. So we might say like this. Let's combine these two explanations. That there was an argument going on. I've explained it before or after, maybe you haven't heard it, that a fundamental argument going on between Kain and Hevel. The argument was, essentially, Kain felt that this world was a world, offering him entitlement. Man has fundamentally got a right to be here. And therefore, based on that, Kain said, I am the first one to go there, and I'm the one that's got the rights to this world. More than that, the world, according to my approach, that is the world it should be, and therefore I'm setting up the world now based on this philosophy, this approach to life. And it's perhaps interesting that the Medrash points out that he was 40, they were both 40, Kain and Hevel, when they brought their sacrifices. Because maybe 40, amongst other things, is an age when one acquires a certain stature, strength, influence, and therefore they wanted each to make their mark on the world, that this is the way the world should be run. So Kain's approach to the world was, the world exists for man, and the world is sort of, so to speak, Hashem, God, has sort of removed himself from the world. He's created the world, and he's given it a fundamental right to exist without too much divine interference. The world runs itself, has a certain nature. And therefore, first of all, man does not owe such a great obligation on an ongoing basis to Hashem. Maybe, yes, you have to thank Hashem for having created this world in the first place, but on an ongoing basis, there's a world that's mine. And therefore, sacrifices, says Kain, I don't have to be constantly busy with sacrifices. Because things are mine by right. I don't have to say on everything, thank you Hashem, you gave me this, I'm offering a bit to you. No, this is mine, this is the way the world works. And therefore perhaps Kain delayed in bringing his sacrifice. And perhaps it wasn't just a delay sort of to deny he didn't want to offer anything to Hashem. Perhaps he was saying, Hashem, I want to give you the best sacrifice. The best sacrifice is, so to speak, a surprise. Miketz Yomim. After it seemed like eternity, there's never going to be a sacrifice. Kain said, here, there's a surprise, Hashem. I'm offering you a sacrifice now. And Hashem was not happy with that, because that's not the appropriate way. The appropriate way is that you have to bring a sacrifice from the very beginning, where Hevel did. Because every second, every instant, you really owe a debt of gratitude to Hashem. And Kain was trying to make a statement that that's not the appropriate way. And there's another aspect which came out in the Medrash to this approach, that the sacrifice also helps a person to sort of provides a break on a person's involvement with his own material needs. The sacrifices, everything has got a potential. We've discussed this before. Everything's got a potential to be a sacrifice. You just say the words, this is holy, this should be for sacrifice, or this should be towards financially financing a sacrifice, becomes a sacrifice. That has the effect that everything has the potential to say, hey, this is not yours. Keep your hands off. Kain was coming to say, no, that's not the attitude. The world is here for us, it exists, there's no limitations. Hashem is not constantly involved in recreating the world, which was Hevel's approach. And therefore, Kain said, we have no need for sacrifices, for gratitude, and we have no need for sacrifices, as a means of limiting our involvement, our ongoing entitlement, without any pause for thought, for consideration. Whereas Hevel took the opposite attitude. He had to be accounted, he went to the opposite extreme. He said, no, we owe a debt of gratitude, and Hashem is constantly recreating everything, and therefore I'm not going to touch anything until I brought my sacrifice. The verses say, the Medrash says, interestingly, that actually when the Targum Yonison says it, I'm going to see it in Eretz Hashem, that one of Kain's complaints was, Hashem, why did you not accept the sacrifice I brought? The way we've explained, it's Kain's question, Kain's complaint is somewhat understood. Kain was saying, I don't really owe any sacrifice. Therefore, the little sacrifice I brought should have been accepted with grace by Hashem. And Hevel's reply to that was that, yes, Kain, but I brought my sacrifice before you. You delayed. According to the verses, the implication is not. The implication is that Kain brought first. By Himi Ketz Yomim, after time had transpired, Vayove Kain brought a sacrifice, not Hevel. And then Hevel Hevi Gamu, and then Hevel also brought a sacrifice. So how can the Targum Yonison say that Hevel said, I brought my sacrifice first? But the answer I think, is what we're explaining here. And Hevel was coming to actually counter Kain's approach. And Hevel, how did he counter? He said, I'm not going to derive any benefit from my animals, from my livestock, at all until I brought a sacrifice. And therefore, this will also explain regarding the wool. Hevel said, I'm not going to touch anything to do with my livestock. I'm not going to take any meat, any milk, and from sheep, what do I derive? I derive wool. Perhaps the sheep were already, his sheep were already capable of being providing wool to make clothes or whatever. And Hevel said, no, I'm not going to do anything until I bring my sacrifice. And therefore the wool was also, so to speak, part of his sacrifice. We asked, his sacrifice was offering up the sheep itself. But the sacrifice was part of the whole approach that I am limiting my material entitlement in this world. And Hevel said, okay, I'm going to do that by not touching anything, even the wool, even the clothes, until I brought my sacrifice. That explains, therefore, partly why Hevel, his sacrifice was actually first, before Kain's. He was already involved in his sacrificial order, even though he hadn't actually put the sheep on the mizbeach, on the altar, but he was involved in what perhaps was the primary intent of the sacrifice, to be somewhat self-controlled, limited, not over-involved in, again, your material needs. That he did already from day one, not taking anything, not deriving any benefit whatsoever from the sacrifice. And therefore, first of all, that's also perhaps what the Das Kain means. That's on a deeper level. We're going to see that Hevel merited the world to come. And you could ask, it's sort of, what does that mean? Hashem sort of gave him something future, present. If Kain will knock you out, then Hashem has given you, you'll be entitled to the world to come. So you could say what it means that Hashem gave Hevel the world to come was he actually gave the world to come in this world. There are two worlds. There's the world you're living in and there's the world to come. And we've explained that when a person denies the world to come, it can be on two levels. The Talmud is extremely, goes to a lot of lengths describing and talking about the world to come, and people deny the world to come. So I've suggested a number of places there's two levels, this denial of the world to come. First level is an absolute denial. People say this is it. I'm just a product of multiple random mutations and just a sort of material oscillating being that's reactive to its environment or developed through reactive. You might say, I've got free will, etc. But obviously that means there's no particular meaning regarding eternity of the soul. There's no world to come. It ends here. At the grave, that's the end of the story. That's one way of denying the world to come. Another way of denying the world to come is on a deeper level. Yes, there is a soul. There certainly is a world to come. But as we're going to see, it's on the level of Kain. The world to come means it's a spiritual world, but it's not something that exists as regards this world. It's a different dimension, a different world, it's a different universe, and therefore has no relevance. It's not that you cannot say a person as entitled to the world to come. That's part of the transition of his existence from this world to the next world. That approach says the world to come is like something different. You're a different person, there's a different world, different dimensions. It's not part of the continuity of your life. And the retort to that, the rebuttal to that, the argument against that is no, the world to come is actually a part of this world. Because this world, this is the Hevel approach, this world is fundamentally not an absolute world. It's a world that's constantly being recreated. It's a world that we're not fully involved in. In actual fact, because we're sort of every instant, so to speak, being drawn into the world to come, into that spiritual realm, where our life is sort of being taken away and recreated every instant. So every instant we're sort of arriving in the world to come and coming back into this world. And therefore, there's very much a very strong interplay between the worlds. It's sort of they're very closely connected. And that's what it means that Hashem gave Hevel the world to come. So to speak, he went with Hevel's sacrifice. He gave an inspiration in the avodah, in the way a person works in this world, to say, yes, Hevel, this is the correct approach. The approach is that this world is not an absolute. You shouldn't be over-engrossed. You should already be in this world, living as it is the world to come. On a molecular level, on a quantum level, yes, things are constantly bouncing in and out of existence, which maybe is shows that is the phenomenon. That's the fundamental nature of this world. Just we see sort of what appears to be a stable continuum. That's not the true nature of the world. Therefore, you can understand what it was that Chazal concluded that. Therefore, the Torah said, based on this, that there's a prohibition of Shaatnez, of combining clothes with linen and wool, because that is the two sacrifices of Kain and Hevel, and it's not appropriate to combine the sacrifice of wool with the sacrifice of linen. The sacrifice of wool, which represented an approach of self-control, of limited material involvement with this world, as opposed to Kain's, which was a total enjoyment, eat and drink today, because tomorrow when we'll be dead, it's a different realm, different dimension, which we don't have to concern ourselves with. And it's not appropriate to combine these, because the wool was very much representative of the sacrifice of Hevel, not partaking of this world. And Kain's was the opposite. Flax, I'm going to leave the sacrifice till the very end. More than that, I might say, I suggested, what is it the Torah has in mind? One of the meanings when it says, in all forms of kilaim, of mixing species, which the Torah prohibits in a number of formats, whether it's combining animals in leading a cart or plowing, whether it's in plowing different, whether planting different types of plants, with the vines, with the seeds, one shouldn't combine. And here we're talking about combining in clothes, flax and wool. So I suggested the Ramban, Nachmanides already explains that these are two fundamental different elements in each case: flax, wool, vineyard, and other crops, or an ox and a donkey, horse. One should not combine. These are fundamentally different species that God created the world, each species in its own, with its own format, its own unique nature. It's not appropriate for you, man, to come along and start usurping the role of creator and combining these. So I take that as I tried to, my understanding of the Ramban is that one might be tempted to say, yes, I can. Because I'm in charge of the world. Therefore, I have the right to sort of combine these. More than that. For example, it says that in one instance one is allowed to make kilaim, to make Shaatnez, and that is tzitzis, the fringes. One can take a beged, a garment of wool, and take fringes of linen and combine them together. With normal circumstances, one may not, because it's combining the two forbidden materials. But for a mitzvah, one may. And we learn out from here that one can sometimes transgress, so to speak, in inverted commas, a negative commandment in order to perform a positive commandment. So I understand this to a certain extent on a level like this, that if you're taking these two elements for a mundane purpose, then yes, like the Ramban says, you should not be playing with the world and combining species that are not meant to be combined. They were created separately. But if they're being used for a mitzvah, for a service of Hashem, then you're allowed to, not just you're allowed to, they actually become one. Fundamentally, the flax is not being used in terms of flax, it's being used as a vehicle for performing a mitzvah, and the wool garment is fundamentally being used as the vehicle for performing this mitzvah. Therefore, they are actually one. If you're not combining disparate elements, you're actually just taking two things that are essentially two aspects of one whole. Based on that understanding, one might say that every time one combines different elements, that is actually what one's trying to say. One is trying to say, yes, I have the right to combine these different elements. Why? Not just because I'm the creator, but because these elements were given to me. And since they're mine, therefore I might say fundamentally, these elements is not just a piece of It's not just a donkey, let's say, and a cow or an ox. It's my ox. It's my donkey. And if I take a deeper view of that, of the mind, I say it's fundamentally mine, it's fundamentally, I'm entitled to that, then this ox has less of an independent nature of an ox. It's my ox. That's really what its true nature and meaning is. And this donkey is fundamentally my donkey, or this wool garment is fundamentally my wool garment, and this flax garment or flax thread is fundamentally mine, and therefore they truly have one nature. It's not flax that might belong to me or anyone else or to Hashem. No, it's my flax. And therefore I would think I can combine. I'm not combining disparate elements, I'm combining things that are the same. The Torah warns, that's not the appropriate attitude. You have to go with the attitude that things are not fundamentally yours. Based on that, we can understand why this derives in actual fact from the offerings of Kain and Hevel. Because that was fundamentally the attitude, the two different attitudes that were being taken. And Kain was coming to say things are fundamentally mine. And therefore, one might have thought based on that you could take the flax and combine it with wool. And if the Torah says no, the wool is fundamentally, Hevel has come with an attitude to say no, it's not fundamentally mine. This is wool. It's maybe Hashem's wool. Certainly not your wool. If you want to make tzitzis, do a mitzvah, yes. But if for your own purposes, it's not yours. And therefore, you do not have the entitlement to combine two elements that are not the same.